Okay, good morning. I thought I would not script this. I'm just going to read it straight. I'm going to narrate to you about a man who I grew up knowing in the pool world. Um, wasn't until my later teens, probably 20s, that I got to know him better. But it's a great story. His son wrote the book, and his son's a champion. And of course, this is a pool story. So I hope you enjoy it. The game of pool begins with controlling the rock, making the cue ball do exactly what you want it to do. If you can't control the cue ball, you're relying on luck more than skill. The game begins with figuring out what you want the cue ball to do, beginning, middle, and end of the shot. Manuel Gonzalez Jr. So that's who the story is going to be about. And sit back and relax as I tell you a little tale. Like me, and like my oldest son after me, my dad fell in love with playing pool from watching his dad play pool. I have no idea how good my grandfather was, but it is obvious he loved the game enough to play it often. And when they were old enough, probably 5 or 6, he took my dad and my uncle Leo with him. Like my dad first took me, and like I took my oldest son as soon as he was tall enough to see over the rail and hold a cue stick by himself. What I know about pool and life, I learned pretty much from watching my dad, talking with him, or having him show me. Over the years, I found time and again that his lessons have been wisdom worth following. My dad said my grandfather was pretty good, but then every 12-year-old kid probably thinks his dad is good at everything. I say 12 because that's the age my dad was the last time he saw my grandfather play. That's how old he was when my grandfather died. How my grandfather died is still a mystery to this day. I can't imagine what that was like for my dad, and he never really talked about it, nor has he ever spoken with me about how he lost part of his arm and a leg while in Vietnam. Neither my oldest sister Denise nor my older sister Renee nor I ever asked him about it while we were growing up. It was a subject too sensitive to be explored with him. But we didn't need to know either. To us, he was amazing, and we were blessed to have him as our dad. We were the lucky ones. It wasn't until we got much older that he started to open up a little, but conversations about his war years always ended with him near tears and asked if he could have a little time to himself. As I got older and more curious, I realized he was only comfortable talking about the war with other veterans who had been there. I would eavesdrop on those conversations when the opportunities came along, but I never came away with my biggest question answered. How did he get hurt? Slowly over the years, as he spoke with more veterans or was interviewed by the local newspaper, the Greeley Tribune, I learned more, but for years, I only learned bits and pieces. I can't say that I blame him for not wanting to revisit those memories, though. In fact, it created in me a greater love and respect for him than words can express. He was never a man to opt for violence or anger to solve a problem. He was a man of courage and peace through and through. But that didn't mean he wouldn't give you a good beating on the pool table if he had a chance. There he ruled with precision and friendliness. Pretty good for a man with only one arm and one leg. It wasn't about the competition, though. It was about the art. At his prime, Dad was one of the best pool players in the state of Colorado, even in the United States, really. He was the toughest, kindest person I've ever known. Not only did he lose an arm and a leg, but it was his right hand he lost, and he grew up right-handed, so he had to learn to play with his left. He overcame all of that to play the game he loved, and to do much more. I grew up with him overcoming any and every obstacle in front of him. Riding with his left hand, jumping on a trampoline, driving a car, working on cars, repairing VCRs and other electronics in his workshop, and so many other tasks. He was so good at these things that it wasn't until I was much older that I ever considered how difficult that must have been for him. And watching him compete in tournaments, and watching how he never acted like any of his injuries mattered or held him back in any way, I learned about courage. As you might imagine, my dad stuck out wherever he went. When we were younger, my sisters and I would notice how people would stare at him, especially kids. My sister and I would handle the situations differently. If I noticed a kid staring at him, it would make me smile. I understood their curiosity. It would cause me to hang on to my dad a little tighter, knowing how amazing he was and how lucky I felt that he was my dad. My sister Denise would get protective. She would stare them down and have to refrain from saying anything. She would hang on to him tight and say to herself, "This is my dad." I understand now how her love for him created that response. My sister Renee would handle it somewhere in between. She would make sure that they knew she saw them staring, but she also understood their curiosity. Dad especially stood out in the pool halls. It's not often you see a guy with only one arm and one leg playing pool. In fact, in all my years of playing, my dad was the only person like that I've ever seen play. And then on top of that, he was good, really good. He won a lot of matches in several of the tournaments he entered. Anyone who played him and thought maybe they should take it easy on him quickly learned better than to underestimate him. It was a mistake they didn't make twice. Dad always drew a crowd too. He was fascinating to watch. The way he balanced on one leg with his crutch and eyed the ball, lining up his pool cue as it rested on a specially designed bridge he carried, and a little slot in his crutch or a small beanbag he always carried with him on the rail. All seemed so impossible. And then the shots he would make. Kevin Silverberg, a good friend of Dad's, he used to play with a lot, once told me of a shot Dad made in a 9-ball tournament. Dan lined it up on a long straightened shot, but to get position on the next ball required a very controlled long draw stroke. He executed it perfectly and then proceeded to run out the rack. One of the younger guys in the tournament came up to him after that and held up his cue with both hands. "Mister," he asked, "can you make my cue do that?" Dad looked at him a little embarrassed and smiled. "Just practice. You can do it too."